The theme for this morning's sharing is discernment amidst distraction. And it's kind of the fruit of two different initiatives that I'm connected to. One really embedded within the heart of Coracle right now, which is the initiative that Coracle is doing on discernment. And so we did a book study a while back that Scott, Community Minister for Baltimore, led by Dallas Willard, called Hearing God. And this has been, pretty major focus that we've honed in on for this year. And at the same time, I was actually leading a different initiative with my other hat as a pastor, and called Crucial Conversations, which was an intergenerational conversation on faith and media use with teenagers and their parents. And so this is really coming together, and I guess I better get my slides up because I've got what I hope to be some helpful visuals to help create the sense of it all. Let's see. All right. All right. Now I can't see you all, and I'm hoping that this is all working. If it's not working, put it in the chat and it should come up. But yeah, discernment amidst distraction. So in addition to these two initiatives, also, I'm happy to say that it is connected very much also to, for those of you who are in the Space for God, that Danny led a couple of weeks ago on how we use technology. And I really want to hold out this image of the hearth and the idea of how do we create spaces where we gather with family, opposed to being in spaces that kind of separate us, right? Well, how also does technology create spaces for us to, what kinds of technology or what kinds of opportunities are there that we prioritize for connection versus separation, not only with God, or not only with our neighbor, but also with God. So I'm gonna run through some slides, and then we're gonna actually create some space for just hearing from God. Dallas Willard, in his book, that opens with this in the preface, which is what I want to open with. Hearing God, a daring idea. Some would say presumptuous and even dangerous. But what if we are made for it? What if the human system simply will not function properly without it? There are good reasons to think that it will not. The fine texture as well as grand movements of life show our need to hear God. Isn't it more presumptuous and dangerous, in fact, to undertake human existence without hearing God? I love that. So I shared a little bit. This was sort of the initiative we led, Crucial Conversations, bridging the gap between information and wisdom through conversation together. And I love to lead a little Visio Divina on that. We don't have, on this image, we don't have time this morning to do that, but I would love for, this is Jesus encountering his culture at this sort of threshold of his own entering in towards adolescence and into manhood. And there's a lot in this image that I think that we can glean and learn from. If there's anything that stands out from you, I would love for you to put it in the chat, because I love to hear what people see from this image. I'll just give you one more minute or two to kind of take that in before we move on. So part of what we realized is that if this is the world that Jesus grew up in through this study that we did, this is a more modern version of what we are dealing with in our culture right now, that we're really in the midst of a digital revolution. And not only what it means, obviously this is affecting our youth, and that's part of the heartbeat in this other context that I was looking at, but it affects every one of us. There wasn't a parent who participated in this who didn't recognize how deeply our lives and how we relate to one another functions. And so if you've been tracking with this theme, I think it would be months now, Bill would have led a Space for God on the discernment daisy. And this is actually a really beautiful, helpful tool for thinking about discernment. I've actually used it in teaching youth what it means and how we can approach the opportunity to be people connected and hearing from God. However, the other context is that I think for many of us in the midst of this digital revolution, all of the things that are opportunities that the smartphone or our different devices create tend to kind of squeeze out the opportunity, the time, or the prioritizing that we may need to really hear from God, to run through the discernment daisy. Oftentimes, I think we find ourselves pressed for the time to really do that. And so part of what I want to be inviting you all to today is a bit of a digital examine and an opportunity to try to really prioritize what it means to be a people who know the voice of our shepherd amidst the noise of this world. And that's the heartbeat of what we want to be creating space for today. So just briefly, context, right? These are the three main gleanings from our study that we did that I want to bring. And what we didn't do, which is what I'm excited for today, is we didn't really try and develop a kind of spiritual practice or have it culminate in something. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of partially begin developing with you all this morning. But the three main things that we felt it important to recognize is that the digital revolution has disrupted the way that we relate to one another. We cannot go back. So we need to be reflective on how best to adapt. Okay, so this idea that things are not ever going to be the same. So in the process of adaptation, do we just absorb, or is there opportunity for us to reflect? So a question that comes out of that is, what of the digital revolution do I need to more deeply reflect on? And I would encourage you all to grab a pen and paper, actually, because we're going to create some space actually for us to be taking these questions before God. But they'll come up again, but if you want to jot them down as we go, that's great too. The other is that there is such a thing as what we might call digital Babylon. This is a term coined by David Kenneman from the Barna Institute. And this is the reality that the worst of the virtual world threatens to undermine human relationships in pretty profound ways. And I think it's important for us to take stock of this fact, that we are fundamentally relational beings, and that the worst of it, right? Not saying that all of it is bad, but the worst of it does seriously threaten how and undermine how we relate to one another as humans. And so there is a threat that we need to learn to resist. So there's sort of 3 R's that we're marching towards, right? One is to learn to reflect on the realities that have changed. The second is to identify real threats that we have to actually resist and say, you know what, I'm not going to participate in this. I'm not going to engage social media in this way. I'm not going to download that app or whatever it might be. So learning to identify that, and then recognizing the top words here, but that digital discipleship does create opportunities to redeem. And I don't know if you all feel like you're able to engage these realities redemptively. I have people in my life who I see doing it in ways that seem really beautiful and redemptive. And I think that we need to learn what it looks like. How does digital discipleship, right, creating opportunities for us to redeem in our relationship with others, and even, with our relationship with God. Hopefully this kind of space is being accommodated by digital opportunities, digital realities, and hopefully it's also creating an opportunity for you to meaningfully connect with God. So a few things that seemed really important for us in the midst of it is to recognize that while it can be overwhelming, especially, we're finding with parents of young children and teenagers, to realize that you're parenting or simply being and existing in the midst of a digital revolution. The fact is that this ain't our first revolution, and revolutions always disrupt, but they also do create opportunities and their need for adaptation. So what can we learn from past experiences, past revolutions? So one of the things that we identified in our process was like, we need to develop constraints. If you think about the automobile revolution, right? That took place not that long ago. The early days of that thing, it was a wild west. You know, there isn't age limits, there isn't speed limits. You know, there's no traffic lights, all of that sort of stuff, and there was real physical carnage, and real devastation that took place. And so you could say, okay, we're not going to do automobiles, right? Or you could say, how do we adapt? How do we make meaningful changes to make this safer? And yeah, we haven't perfected it. There's still plenty to do, but there has been really meaningful and helpful growth. And so how do we develop digital constraints? And these are just a few brief examples that people could be considering. I'm not going to go over them right now, but just this idea, what are the seat belts? What are the speed limits that we need to develop, that you need to develop, to ensure that you're not dealing with the kind of a kind of social devastation that we are reckoning with as a culture, as a world right now, in light of sort of the sudden onslaught of the digital revolution. So developing constraints. Another one is to think in the same ways that the consumer revolution, right? Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the Consumer Revolution, you know, we didn't have to spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about eating well. We had to spend time thinking about how to eat enough. But there was a transition, a major transition from how do we eat enough to, okay, how do we eat well? And it was only after really generations of people dealing with diabetes, dealing with unhealth because of overconsumption. And we're at a moment where the opportunities presented to us through the digital revolution are so overwhelming that we're going to have to develop a healthy digital diet. And so Andy Crouch talks about, you know, practicing a digital Sabbath, and their family fights for this idea of 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, for digital Sabbath. And there's other things you can think about, right? Healthy structure for appropriate digital snacking or media snacking, right? We've all had to learn at some point in our life and as a culture that just because we can access all of these foods, much of which isn't healthy, doesn't mean we should. And so we've had to develop practices of resistance, practices of diet. And so we're at that place, I think, in the midst of this digital revolution where we need to develop healthy digital diets. And so what we're wanting to just begin with is creating here now is an opportunity to start reflecting on that reality. And this is what one of the things that we felt was so crucial, because a lot of what this means is rules. It means developing healthy practices and really even self-imposed rules. And so I want to take a minute to read from Deuteronomy 30 to help us recognize the role of rules in our life and what they actually want to lead us towards. So Deuteronomy 30, I'm going to read it now for you all. So I invite you just to take a moment, close your eyes, and just listen and let this wash over you. Now, what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven that you have to ask, who will ascend to heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so that we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea and get it and proclaim it to us that we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and it is in your heart, so you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. This day I call the heavens and earth as witness against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. If we are fundamentally relational beings, then learning and discerning the commands that are in our heart, right? These are in your heart that you may obey it, as it relates to digital engagement, is an invitation to choose life. And it's an invitation that I think all of us in this generation are going to need to take really seriously if we are going to find ourselves thriving in the way that God intends and connected to God in a meaningful way, because it is the Lord who is our life. So in this, we developed this concept of rules for life, for digital life. These were 10 commandments. They were just fun. All of the sort of what I hope to be helpful images and ideas, I'll put in the chat on a webpage where we kind of developed from this study. These were a lot of these were the things that the kids themselves, the youths themselves, sort of developed kind of based off of the other 10 commandments. And then we came across this incredibly helpful question, and this is the last question that will kind of guide our time moving forward. But in thinking about this idea of choosing life, this comes from Christina Cook. She started the joy of missing out. What is it? No, something like that. Yeah, instead of the fear of missing out, FOMO, it's JOMO, the joy of missing out. She's a Christian author. She's writing about this topic a lot. And she's really honed in on this idea as this being the primary question that might guide a kind of digital examine for our lives. And she proposes it as a question we ask ourselves each day. What did I do today that brought life? What did not? So that simple, allowing this to really come to that realization that as relational beings, we need to adapt to how we engage technology in ways that bring life and not death. And so to begin to allow that question to permeate our hearts and minds on a regular basis. So that's enough from me of just sort of trying to lay some groundwork to make the case that in the same ways that we have developed all sorts of spiritual disciplines and practices to help guide us, to help connect us, to help tune us to the voice of God, that in a world of just so much opportunity for distraction, we might have to help develop a kind of digital examine or do a bit of a digital audit in our life to ensure that the proportion, right, between the discernment daisy and the digital products that are on offer has a healthy balance, and that we're giving the digital, or not the digital daisy, that's funny, that we're giving the discernment daisy enough real honest space in our life to help us be tuning into the voice of God. So I hope that's helpful. What we're going to do now is we're just going to create, in the last I guess 6 minutes, I'm going to play some music, and we're going to keep these questions up, and we're going to I want to encourage you to invite God, to invite your good shepherd to be speaking to you, to write down these questions, and then to create some space where you can meaningfully begin to do a digital exam in your life. Sound good? All right, let me bring up. But before we do that, I'm going to read the scripture that's guiding this time, which is from Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me into life everlasting. Right. Yeah. Stop sharing here. So I recognize that that's not enough time to meaningfully engage those questions, but hopefully it was enough time to begin to engage some of those questions, uh, and to begin to take into account what sort of a digital diet it is that I've developed, and how might God be inviting me to examine that, and in order to find those sort of healthy boundaries that will lead to life.